On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Spencer Lourens. He's the Chief Data Officer at CLA. We're going to be talking about mapping business to data strategy. Well, you got to start off by identifying the business strategy, the business problem. What are you looking to transform? And then set up the data strategy to support that. We're going to be talking about identifying the problem, making sure that the juice is worth the squeeze. I'm sure Spence will dive in and talk to us about that. Also, are you spending long enough time around the problem to really understand it before you start going off building whatever technology solution there is? A couple of things we'll try to get to. Obviously, Spencer, thank you for your time. Hopefully we'll fit it all in, but appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot to cover, so we'll do our best, won't we?
There we go. All right, before we start, CLA, what do you guys do over there?
So we're a professional services firm. So that's meant that we have a lot of accountants, we have lawyers, et cetera. We offer audit services, tax services, outsourcing services. That could be helping small clients with financial operations, either closing their month end or doing bookkeeping for them. But it could also mean working on larger projects with some, Fortune 500 size clients. We also do wealth advisory, and we have a digital practice, which does things like data analytics, data science, and some custom development, integrating systems, things like that. And we also resell software. So like some ERP systems we resell at CLA.
Lots of moving parts, close to a lot of hot topic areas. And obviously, you guys are operating within the business. And anytime we talk about strategy, especially moving from business to the data strategy, it all starts off with those requirements. And I know a lot of people talk about requirements and, you have to listen to the stakeholder, which I suppose is where we're going to start. But when you as a data leader, you enter a meeting and you're listening to your stakeholders, what are you actually listening for, right? I think identifying the strategy is one thing, but I think when you're in those meetings, what are you listening for in terms of as they're going through business needs and kind of business requirements?
Multiple things. Sometimes it's pain that they're feeling, where I can see they're unhappy about something from a process standpoint or a technology standpoint or a data standpoint. Sometimes it's also passion. I can see what they're passionate about that makes them tick because they want to improve things for our clients and our people. So I'm listening for those sorts of things, but I also find I have to ask a lot of questions because when you're talking conversationally with somebody, you might talk about things that are 20% important, 80% important, 50% important. There's still signal and noise. I would offer, regardless of whether I don't think that one of our stakeholders is telling us to work on something that's not important, but they might talk about things that are of varying degrees of importance throughout the conversation. So again, I'm trying to look at things that they're unhappy about, things that they want to change, and also things that seem like visionary triggers for them, if you will.
Yeah, and I guess, the one thing I've been recently asking a lot of just technology leaders is, do we spend enough time with the problem to really understand it? And not by the standpoint of, do I understand to go off and start strategizing, right? So when it comes to listening to some potential issue with the business and shift maybe in strategy, talk to us a little bit about how you go about sitting with the stakeholder, making sure that you understand that business problem before you start putting on that technologist hat.
Well, at first, I think that there's an anxiety sometimes when you meet with somebody to say, hey, I want to solve this in the next 2 hours because there's a lot to do. People want to make an impact. They want to be a trusted advisor. I think that's something that a lot of data leaders feel today. But on the other side of that, if I think about working with clients, what you really want to do is create a relationship, and that takes time. You can't fake that. You can't fast track that. It takes time to know folks. So I think it also takes time to know their problems and really understand what problem it is you're trying to solve. For instance, you might just get the scope of the issue wrong and think it's 10 times bigger than it actually is. Or again, it might be one of their 20% problems. It's not one of the 80% problems. So I think also as a data leader, what we're trying to do can be so big because it's supposed to impact the entire business strategy that I think we should really take the time to wrap our arms around everything holistically. And of course, every stakeholder is going to be a part of that whole picture. But but not letting the pressure get to us and think that we have to have everything figured out tomorrow. It takes time. We have to let that organically happen, right? So that's what I would say probably.
I like that. And I think, as you're kind of going through that and spending time making sure that you've identified the degree of the business problem, right? What kind of business strategy, what kind of transformation is sitting there? When you start looking at those degrees, right, that transformation, it could be small. Sometimes you mentioned it's impacting the broader organization. As you're focusing on that transformation and you start getting a bigger scope, larger impact, wider organizational, obviously that requires a lot more moving parts when it comes to data, a lot more integration across different organizations and whatnot. So as you kind of are starting to look at that and you're starting to assess, when does the switch for data strategy flip on? Because obviously, I joke with a lot of people. I go, it's almost impossible for technologists not to start daydreaming of that solution. But at some point, you do have to start thinking, well, this person, this group, this team, this unit has a problem. If I can't put in a data strategy that fits it, can I actually help them with it?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think that you have to start with impact that one could have and effort required, and really overlay those two things on an X and Y axis. But I think we have to make room for POC phase and smaller phases of the project so that we don't get too excited too quickly. Because there's a lot of things you could learn in the POC phase that might tell you something needs to change in the overall process, something needs to change in terms of the people, and the technology might not always be the answer. So you really have to back up and think about, how am I going to use technology to solve this, as opposed to just taking on everything. And also, you've got to think about what's critical, what's important, and what's long-term something we should pay attention to, but it's not important today. And so, like, from a data perspective, there could be literally hundreds or thousands of data assets that we could be trying to harmonize and bring into one centralized area so that we can build a holistic enterprise data asset for the firm. But some of those data assets we might bring in might represent less than 5% of activity. They might not have a lot of what I like to call residual intelligence in them that we're trying to build into this big asset we'd like to create that can help us better understand our clients, offer them the best services possible, and also streamline the offering of services that we already offer to them. So I think that's really important, as you look at how big can what I'm working on be versus how much time it would take to deliver that as well. So there's a lot that goes into it, I guess, from a decisioning standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I think there's a lot going into it. And I think the one thing that I think everybody who works in technology runs into is finding pain points and understanding the scope and actually understanding whether or not you should do it. I guess you mentioned the analogy is the juice worth the squeeze. And I guess sometimes when problems are not big, but requires heavy lifting of technology, as a stakeholder, you might not care. But as a technologist, as the chief data officer that you have to deliver on these, that's a tough call. I guess when you look at that, that is the juice worth the squeeze factor and how you evaluate that, that's not a science. It's an art. I get that. But how do you start judging that line?
I mean, where my mind goes right now, and I've thought about this before, is how we elevate things from a severity standpoint. When you think of operations, how many people are impacted? How much revenue is impacted? Is this across an entire system that's being impacted? Just from an ITIL or an app or support operations perspective, I would probably go at it in a similar way. I would try to understand, because if I'm a stakeholder, I'm going to say, hey, this is a problem. We need to solve it tomorrow. That's my world, right? That's my team. That's what I live day in and day out. Whether that's 5 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, right? Whether that's 5 million in revenue, 10 million in revenue, 50 million in revenue, it runs a gamut. And so I think when we talk about, is the juice worth the squeeze, it might be a similar amount of effort to impact 5 as it might be to impact 100. It might be a similar amount of effort to impact 5 million as opposed to 50 million. And I think that as a steward, viewing myself as a steward, as somebody that's trying to make the right decisions while I'm in this position today, I need to really think about that when I'm trying to make the best decision. And that does mean that you might rub some people the wrong way, and you can't make everybody happy as a leader too. And I think that's even true within our teams, because folks within a team may have a feeling about one technology being the best, but it doesn't fit the other people in the team. And so we have to make decisions for the whole instead of an aspect of the whole. You know, it's not really what you asked, but I think you can apply these principles in many different ways, I guess is what I'm saying. And so it's not easy to do, but if you're trying to build relationships with stakeholders, I might not be able to work on this one for you, but what else is there that might have a bigger impact? You know, what else are we working on that's going to impact your team, even if we're not able to solve this one pain point? Trying to focus on the positives and also realize that, hey, again, like I said, leadership can be hard. And sometimes you have to deliver the bad news that, hey, we can't do that because we have to do these other things. And you may not even want to say, we're going to do these other things, because that can just make it worse. But yet, hey, we can't prioritize this today, but I understand you're in pain, and we will continue to look at it as we look at all of the, you know, initiatives we're trying to tackle and go after in the next 6 months, 12 months, so on and so forth, whatever that time horizon, the appropriate time horizon would be.
We didn't talk about this, but as a follow-up, I am curious, you know, a lot of times we see the engineering teams, we see other teams with the product backlogs, the product owners. There's some visibility across, you know, different type of engineering units within data. When we were talking about this business strategy, there's a lot of different people. Data cuts across everything everyone touches. How much visibility should there be? So should everyone see all these different opportunities across? Should it be something that the data officer has and is deciding on his own? And I guess the reason I'm asking is, when we're talking about, is this juice worth the squeeze? I think most business leaders would look at different initiatives and go, you know what, that is a bigger problem than I have. I don't know if I can really trump it. But obviously you can also describe that. But that visibility, I guess, at every organization is going to be different.
I love transparency. At the end of the day, you know, even if they're hard conversations, if we're having them earlier and being transparent, it's a little bit of discomfort today as opposed to a lot tomorrow. And there's a lot of people who have written about that. Even like Radical Candor talks about feedback early versus later, and how it can be disastrous if I wait an extra year. So I love that idea. I would say, Amir, I don't think we're super mature in terms of how we do it today. We have more of a SWAT team approach, where there's a trusted group of decision makers that I confide in or commune with, if you will, on things that we're looking at. And sometimes they bring things to me, and we make that decision as a group, but we don't necessarily throw that information out to the entire CLA family, which is what we call ourselves at CLA. I think that would make sense to consider, because I like that idea of transparency. It could be SharePoint list. It could be some other location, you know, where we share, hey, these are the big things we're working on. I will say that we do a good job of folding these initiatives into what we call programs. So we have products, and multiple products might have a similar theme, and they fold into what we call programs. We have our program management team, and those things are reported out to our leaders at the firm, who we call matrix leaders. And they're also reported out in, you know, firm-wide communications by either our CEO, Jen Leary, maybe our Chief Solutions Officer, Yasir Karam, or James Watson, those kinds of individuals. So we do that in a way, but it's not as crisp as I think what you're saying we could do, which I like that idea, because it would also make us think about other metrics that are why we decided to go where we did, which could be back to the number of people impacted, the potential revenue, the effort versus the impact, and those kinds of things. So yeah, we don't do that. We do a little bit of it in some ways, but I like the idea of it a lot. And I can see how it would help as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I talk to leaders, you know, the CTO office, you know, VP of engineering, they have a certain different way of approaching this. I think because it's seemingly a longer process. I think, and again, we're going to kind of divert from the strategy piece, but we'll bring it back, is they have longer development cycles. With data, there always seems to be, I have a short-term solution and I have a long-term solution. Let me give you the short-term while we do the long-term. I think everybody in data pitch that. It's not something new, but that also makes the roadmap, what they do, having a backlog, very hard to justify. Going, well, this is the value of these items to the company, but also there's a short-term value that has less value, but I can get in your hands. That, I think, makes this very challenging. And maybe my question to you when it comes to supporting business strategy, this concept of short-term wins, long-term wins, as data professionals, are we helping ourselves by putting in quote unquote short-term wins that might not, I know everyone says they fit into the long-term. I got that. We also know that, yeah, that's not necessarily always as easy as it sounds, but these short-term solutions also have a misrepresentation of expectations of the solutions we can deliver. So long-winded way of asking you, this concept of short-term wins, long-term wins, is it really healthy? Is it really helping us deliver on the bigger business strategy within data?
The short answer, though, is probably I don't know, and I think it's case specific and how one does it. So I might delineate between the idea of the proof of concept or the proof of technology to put something in people's hands to say, hey, is this AI agent working? Do we need to go back and put more examples into the pipeline to retrain and reassess it so that it will actually give you the performance you want? That's one way, but it's not really putting it in the hands of the masses. It's putting it in the hands of a small group. So it's a little different than what you mentioned, where I always go when I'm in these conversations, because we're a very deadline-oriented firm. So there's many scenarios where we say, wow, to get this right, we're going to miss this season or this deadline. We're not going to be able to provide this to our practitioners on the timeline that we really want. So we have to make some decisions, and one of the things I find, not that I would call myself a police officer, but I find that I am willing to have that pushback in certain scenarios to say, do we want to do that? Because that's technical debt at the end of the day. We would have to redo that and undo this. But the reason I say I don't know is there's still also winning over and keeping your customers. So if we just don't deliver, or we stop, or we shut it off, there's a risk that those we're trying to help would no longer be interested in that help because they don't think long-term we can deliver. So it's almost like a psychology thing, but I think that there's no one answer, but I do think that you can hurt yourself if you create something without folding it into the long-term strategy, because it's going to be overwhelming from a tech debt standpoint. Maybe you can't support it. There's a lot of things that show up with data, and I know you said, we always say we fold it into the short term to the long term, so we're good. And I'm kind of saying we do that. Well, we at least try to, right? And I think the other issue here is citizen dev is a bigger deal now. In citizen dev space, somebody can spin up a great solution, whether it's using AI, analytics, computer vision models, something like that, where they can feed documents in and get an answer back. And that can be done very quickly, and it can have great benefit to our practitioners. And I love it, and we're going to continue to do it. The communication it takes, I think, to explain, that's great. And that was able to be spun up so quick because it didn't require a closed system. i.e., I didn't need to take the data that came out of that agent that you extracted and surface it anywhere to store it longer term to reuse it and monetize. We didn't have to build some of the other closed loop scenarios where this is folded into a broader business process. It's just this one thing on its own. We can build that very quickly. And you can do that with pro code as well, right? So I think that folds into this short term versus the long term. And sometimes we get, dinged on, hey, this is taking a lot longer than when a citizen dev does it. And so it's just a matter of, one, don't overreact, don't get frustrated and say, you're not understanding what we're doing, but instead just have that conversation, say, that's true, but here's what you're not getting, and that kind of short solution that we're going to be able to provide with a longer term, and how much more robust it can be, and how much more enterprise value it can provide. So that's where my head goes with that question. So I don't know, right? There's multiple ways to look at it, and it is an art, like you said earlier.
No, I love that. I think this is not, I don't think there is an answer to this question. I think it's the reason this question came up, and I love your viewpoint on it, is as we're now talking about Gen AI, right? We've been talking about business strategy, data strategy. Obviously, the next thing to talk about potentially on the list is everyone is trying to come up with how they want to tackle AI, generative AI, which then falls back on all these decisions we've made in data. I personally think tech debt is minuscule compared to data debt. I think data debt is ginormous within orgs, and we're going to start uncovering what's underneath the hood at a lot of places. And when we talk about the short-term wins, long-term wins, we talk about bigger companies that have had acquisitions, mergers, change of systems, all these different things. And you are going to get stakeholders that are actively going, hey, I want this. I want to see if we can get a human-in-the-loop solution. As the data officer, you need to go back and start envisioning that strategy and factor that in. And I guess that's maybe, an interesting just question. And no one has an answer to answer this one. This is just your thoughts on it. But when you start thinking about Gen AI and you start looking at the data debt within an organization, what is your take on that? Do you go, hey, you know what? I need to start tackling piecemeal? Is it I need a broader strategy piece? Is it just curious what your thoughts are?
I would say there is a broader strategy that encompasses regulatory, seamless, or cross-selling. We call cross-selling seamless. Things for our family members and how to help them more. And there's probably 4 or 5 different lenses through which I view the data strategy holistically today. And as we look at data debt, I'm then still thinking about effort versus impact. Where do I want to go first? And saying we can't do it all at once. We are doing several things at once. And we are integrating the process of unwinding data debt into the creation of AI agents, so that as we start to build AI solutions that bring in data that was always locked into disparate business applications, it's now going to a central place. It's now organized by space and time. It's now going to be accessible in a more governed and secure way. Like, that's how we're approaching it. So I've kind of said, cut our losses to an extent on the data debt that we had where this was locked into different systems. We are pulling some of that out and figuring out how to use APIs and other interfaces to get in and get it out. But I'm saying a lot of folks would say we're sitting on a gold mine of data. And I would say, yes, but there's immense friction in going into that gold mine and mining the gold. And for the tomorrow that we're building toward, we're going to get it not free of charge because we've had to do a lot of work to get to where we're trying to go, but we're going to get it automatically just throughout the process of everyday operations, whether that's how our clients engage with us, whether that's the work we're doing for them. It's all going to a place where we can leverage it in a commingled way and an enterprise way across the whole organization. So that's my thoughts on it. And so it's not a perfect answer again, but I guess it goes back to, you got an elephant, which bite? Which is the first bite, and then take another one, and then take another one. And that's kind of how I look at it. Again, with the lens towards effort versus impact, the lens towards, what's the highest value, my highest and best purpose, even if there are multiple things we're going to attack at the same time, because we have the personnel for it, and they're all high value.
Yeah, I love the discussion and dialogue. I think these are a lot of the questions. I think that we've been going through a wave of fascination with Gen AI and what AI can do. And I think there's a lot of wheels in motion in a lot of places. And I do think some of what we're talking about here at the end about the strategy behind it, I think there's a lot of ideas of how to tackle it, where the value is for an org, that ROI piece. And I think everything you articulated is very well grounded. I think I'm hoping a lot of people are going down that path, but I love your viewpoints, and I love kind of how you're taking this as both a holistic viewpoint, but also looking down at that micro level and understanding all the moving pieces and parts in this thing.
Thanks, man. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah. So if someone wants to reach out to you, pick your brain on just continuing the conversation, what's a good way of doing that? Because we've touched on a lot of different areas, so I'm sure there's going to be some questions.
I mean, LinkedIn is probably best. That's the social media I use. So if you find me in there, Spencer Lourens, and you'll see Chief Data Officer at CLA, send out a connection request with a message. And I'd love to chat with people too. I'm always looking to grow the network in this role, in this space, because there's a lot to learn. Like even talking today, you mentioned that. It's kind of just one approach, and we've got to commingle a lot of them to answer them. There's not one answer for a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, we'll include that in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different episode. Until then, 2 things. One, I know we started off talking about mapping the business data strategy. I think Spence did a great job walking us through there. We kind of got more granular in some of those aspects and understanding how he evaluates opportunity, how he manages stakeholder, the infamous short-term versus long-term strategy, which I think every data leader has had to grapple with, and also where Gen AI fits within strategy as we're talking. So share this episode with somebody else. I think it's a great conversation. I think Spence has great views. I don't think there's a single answer, so I think the dialogue is going to be really great to have within the community. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave a review for the show. Let me know how you like it. I'd appreciate that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.